And today we've got Debbie here, our social worker at the Cognitive Empowerment Program, talking about the power of prioritizing self-care. So welcome in to Debbie and Suzette, who host our Live Well sessions. Debbie is one of our social workers who has experience and expertise working with aging populations, specifically with memory loss. And she has done that in a variety of different settings, everything from law settings to clinic settings to other social work settings and everything in between. So, Debbie, thank you so much. She's also joined by Suzette Benford, who's our therapeutic core director here at the program and also leads our Live Well sessions. And so we're excited to have you ladies on today to offer a little bit of guidance on something that comes up from time to time is we can sometimes think that self-care is very selfish. And I think many of us have been raised to believe that and think that. And one of the things that we're going to offer as an alternative today is this notion that it's not selfish, it's self-full to be able to come into these spaces and think about what is it that I need. So, Debbie, I'll let you pull up your slides and go ahead and introduce your talk and maybe even tell us a little bit about why this is a topic that comes up in the journey of experiencing life after a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. When we were talking about this theme of February and love and um, how we express and experience love, I felt like it was really relevant both for individuals who have been diagnosed with a cognitive impairment and find it harder to love themselves than it used to be, but also relevant for care partners who get very laser focused on caring for a person with a cognitive issue. And it's easy to neglect caring about yourself in that situation. So I thought it would be good to have some reminders about really making um, the self a priority. So
I love that,
I and
Debbie.
I've and as I was working on this and reviewing some stuff, I felt like there's nobody that doesn't benefit from some reminders of this stuff. Um, so I'm saying that being self-centered is a very good way to be. And Megan stole my thunder there, that we're socialized against considering ourselves as a priority. But I think it's really important that we take time to do that. And um, who doesn't love a Venn diagram? Am I right? So this is the simplest one that we could come up with. The self is in the center. So this is really about self-centering. And around there, we have self-care, self-compassion, and self-talk. So I'm going to focus on self-compassion first, but really um, there's no right or wrong way to think about these concepts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about self care and what we mean by that. And then Suzette's going to chime in with some self talk guidance. I was looking for definitions of compassion, and interestingly, they all talk about a will or efforts to alleviate suffering in another being. And um, I found that that was really interesting that even in the definitions of compassion, the self is kind of an afterthought. But really, all beings, great and small, wish to live with ease, wish to live without suffering or discomfort. So, starting right there, um, we know that compassion is really important in considering that everyone feels this way, right? Everyone we know wants to not be stressed out, right? So that's a pretty simple concept that we can all agree on. Um, and that compassion is like a muscle that when we strengthen it, we can do better at it. So the kicker is that we really can't use our compassion on other people to alleviate their suffering or make their lives easier until we have genuine compassion for ourselves. Okay, now it can scooch forward. Thanks. So I also thought it was interesting to really deep dive a little more deeply into these misconceptions that Megan was referring to. Um, so the first one is, about selfishness. We have this idea that um, taking care of other people is more important than taking care of ourselves. And it's actually the opposite is actually true. When we take good care of ourselves, we can take better care of other people. It's not always going to be me first, but that the metaphor of putting your own oxygen mask on first before you can help somebody else with their mask really does apply here. Um, and the next one is about sugarcoating. So, self compassion is not being blind to what's really going on. It's actually having genuine empathy in response to uh, noticing that things are really hard. And you can experience what challenges are like for a human being and admit that real life is messy. And that's just a fact for human beings. Things are not always easy. And it's not sugarcoating to have compassion for yourself and to say, I'm having a hard time today, or right at this moment, I'm feeling a way that I don't like. So, self pity, you know, the idea that people who have self compassion are, just kind of wallowing, and that could not be further from the truth. Um, when we have self compassion, again, it's about having an accurate perspective that this thing on the plate in front of me is hard and I'm struggling with it. Um, and then also that leads to the next one, that the misconception that self-compassion is a passive attitude. um, it's it's by really taking stock of the reality of how something is challenging that we can have a more active attitude, that we can be more effective at self-improvement, for example. So self-compassion helps us to be better and do better. It's not about sugarcoating and turning a blind eye to our shortcomings at all. Okay, moving right along. Kristen Neff is like the guru of self-compassion. We love her, and she talks about uh, self-compassion as a way of emotionally recharging our batteries. So again, rather than becoming drained by always helping others, self-compassion allows us to fill our cup, to fill ourselves up, our internal resources, so we have more to share with those who need us. Okay, so there you will find many definitions of self-compassion that list, 9 or 10 elements. But I felt like it, for our conversation here, the most productive way that we could talk about it is to really boil it down to the simplest elements, and that these work. that these are really all we need, to orient ourselves toward kindness toward ourselves, um, to focusing on mindfulness and our shared humanity. Again, that idea that all beings find things difficult at times. It's part of the human condition. So, kindness toward yourself, and it sounds kind of simplistic, but it really is an attitude of friendliness. The idea that you can treat yourself as well as you treat a good friend, and especially when things are difficult. You treat yourself as well as you would treat a friend who's going through something hard. It's not this pick yourself up by your bra straps and what's wrong with you kind of thing. It's really being genuinely sensitive to the experience of it being difficult. Mindfulness, is we talk a lot about mindfulness at the Cognitive Empowerment Program, and we want you to do everything mindfully, right? Pay attention to the wrinkles on the raisin that you're eating all the time. But it's really just the idea that you are paying attention to the present moment on purpose and without judgment. Paying attention to the present moment on purpose and without judgment. Um, and then this idea of humanity is viewing any suffering that you're experiencing. And, suffering makes it sound like you're really, at death's door. And I don't mean that. I just mean things that we struggle with, that we are aging, or that we have gotten a diagnosis of anything, of, cataract, or of, you know, low bone density, I was told I have. And, that's not news I wanted to hear. And so we take these experiences as part and parcel of being human. And the more that we can identify it as a shared human experience, the less we are self-critical, and also the less that we're wallowing. We're not feeling sorry for ourselves because we're feeling human with ourselves. Okay, so I found these phrases to practice. And again, I can't say this enough. I learned so much just going through these notes and considering that none of us, fail to benefit from these practices. May I accept myself just as I am. And that's the idea that my best is different on any given day, maybe from the morning to the afternoon, but may I accept myself as I am. May I be kind to myself unconditionally. Not when I can pack myself into my skinny jeans. May I be kind to myself now. May I consider that all human beings struggle at times. May I encourage myself as I would a good friend. May I care for myself. And may I have peace of mind and of body. And I'm going to delve into that second to last one a little bit. May I care for myself, as we start talking about self-care. Okay. So what do we mean when we say self-care? What, people are always saying, oh, honey, you can't give from an empty cup. You got to take care of yourself. And we think, gosh, when am I supposed to do that? And, what does that even mean or look like. It's really hard when you're overwhelmed. Um, Self-care sounds like something else I have to put on my to-do list. I'm doing this, that, and everything else. And now you want me to also take care of myself? Please. I'm taking care of the dog. I'm taking care of the in-laws. Goodness. Um, so, Suzette, will you advance for a sec? May I care for myself on that list? Uh, Self-care here refers to any or all the ways an individual tends to their own emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual well-being. And I stole this definition from a talk that I attended that was for social workers, uh, and it was really they made the argument that for helping professionals, we are the tools of our trade. And just as if I were a chef, I would need to keep my knives sharp, as a helping professional, I have an ethical obligation to take good care of myself because I can't have the compassion and creativity that I need to meet the challenges of people that I work with unless I care for myself as well or first. Um, and I thought that that idea was really valuable. It certainly applies to our care partners, but I think it applies to everybody that you are, you need to keep the tools of your trade in good working order. And so that's your sanity. Those are your coping skills. So, you know, you can't pour from an empty pitcher, right? This is what they're talking about. So I wanted to share that because I thought it was really wise. I didn't make it up, but I can pass it along. So just as there are misconceptions about having compassion for yourself, um, there are barriers to self-care as well. Um, and a lot of them come from how we were socialized, right? Um, we don't we don't want to be called these names. You're self-serving, you're selfish, you're self-absorbed. Um, and we can easily get confused and think that self-care means we're those things, but it's not. Um, we often, especially women, find ourselves apologizing when we set boundaries to protect our time or our energy. I'm sorry, but all those things. And we don't need to apologize for taking care of ourselves because taking care of ourselves makes us better at being there for others. And because we're worth taking care of as well. We manage somehow to push through, right? We dig deep, we get that second wind. We can get really used to ignoring our own needs. And that can make it hard to even identify a lot of work to delegate anything and to explain the task to somebody else. And we just say, I'll just do it myself and not take that break or not go to that um, concert or yoga class or lunch or book club. I'll just do it myself. And we get used to doing that so that self-care tends to get used to riding in the back seat. So the first thing in terms of advice about self-care that I have is check in with yourself early and often. So um, can you click forward one? How stressed am I? This may look familiar to some of our CEP folks because we do have this slide show up in our Live Well in another form. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed am I? right? And the little asterisk at the bottom there is an encouragement to not wait until you're at 9.5 before you pay attention and decide it might be important to do some stress management, because it's a lot harder to rein it in. Once you're overwhelmed, it's so much harder to soothe yourself. But if you can start to tune in to the ways in which you might notice that you're stressed, you can take better care of yourself earlier and not get to a point where it's really hard to soothe yourself and feel better. So, stress is different for everybody. The kind of stress that you're under, as well as the way that it will show up. Some of us are really what they call somatic. It will show up in your body, physical symptoms. You might have indigestion. You might have a headache. Uh, you notice your shoulders are creeping up to your ears and you've got knots in your neck and back. Um, Shallow breathing is a good clue that you're under stress. Um, if if you do an experiment and breathe only with the very top lobes of your lungs and kind of pant, you actually start feeling anxious. That is how we breathe when we're stressed out. And you have to really consciously breathe all the way into your abdomen. The lungs go way down as low as your belly button. So you lower your diaphragm and take a really big belly breath and sigh, especially if no one's around, like a sigh that you can actually hear is very satisfying and allow the stress to leave your body with that breath. Um, Other ways that stress shows up are more habits, behaviors. So, um, being very critical toward others, being really rigid, and this is really it's kind of a vicious cycle. When I'm stressed out, I'm a lot less creative at problem solving, and I get more rigid, and I don't notice that what I'm doing is not solving a problem. It might even be making it worse because I'm really stuck to my plan, whether it's working or not. Uh, Crying, drinking, smoking, procrastinating, or being tardy. We don't think about these as avoidant behaviors, um, but they do tell us if I'm late to this doctor's appointment, it might be because I'm really dreading it. So if I can get honest with myself and say, this is hard, I might be able to get myself on time. Um, and avoidance is an interesting thing in and of itself. Sometimes when we avoid something like a difficult conversation, uh, we actually give it more power. We end up having it sit on the back burner, and kind of that dread about having that difficult conversation really can grow just by putting it off. So a lot of self-care is about really trying to get honest with yourself so that small problems don't grow into big problems. So, and then that last one, emotional signs, those are, probably what we think of first when we think, oh, I'm really stressed, right? I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Um, those are easier to notice. But again, once they get to that, 9 or 10, they're really harder to deal with. And the truth is that some of us need uh, professional intervention. Some of us may need to find a therapist or a counselor. We need to get ourselves to a support group. We may even need an antidepressant or something to help us uh, get more restful sleep so that we can take better care of ourselves. So, okay, so clicking on forward. Um, Again, this is a slide that shows up at CEP. We talk about self-care specifically in context of living with MCI, whether you are the person with an MCI diagnosis or the person living with MCI in someone that you love. um, Reminding yourself to breathe and taking some deep breaths together now and then, especially when you notice that things are not going well, um, and and being kind to yourself and the other person by just saying, I know we have somewhere to get to, but we're going to just have to breathe for a minute. Structuring time and having contingency plans. Sometimes it's not only a plan B, it's also a plan C. And sometimes it means if things are going pretty well, then the other things that we had planned might, maybe they can wait. You know, we're really enjoying this time, and being present in this moment is, enjoyable. So it's self-care to say, we're having a good time. We don't want this to end. We want to put off something else. And having the flexibility to do that. Um, so it's about having the flexibility to change course before your ship is taken on water, right? Um, And again, if you find that something that you've planned is not great, it's not a failure of the planner to say, I'm going to make some changes in this scenario. It's really a success. Um, and so self-care really, it doesn't mean that you have to, you know, go join an ashram or something. It's about building in little ways that you can soothe yourself when you're what I call jangled. And even if it's only for a few minutes at a time, it's about having little sips quite often rather than drinking the whole cup at once. So engaging as many of your senses as possible. Just while I was working on this, I told Suzette I got to a point where I wasn't working productively and I needed to go make some popcorn because I was working on the computer. And every microwave is different, as they tell you on the box. My microwave makes popcorn perfectly in 2 minutes and 32 seconds. And so I just stood there using my senses to listen for the pops, to smell the popcorn, to kind of notice what was going on in my body, and just really take 2 minutes and 32 seconds, to be present and not judge myself for not having already finished the thing, and being honest with myself about the anxiety of a recording living on YouTube forever, you know. And so I kind of liked that example because it was really brief and it really did recharge me. It really did allow me to get back and do what I needed to do, and not be as judgmental with myself. And so when you think of your senses, I really encourage you to not just think in terms of the traditional five senses of hearing, vision, touch, smell, and taste. Um, but I highly value the sense of humor, and that sixth sense, your intuition, is priceless. So I want to encourage you to really notice those. And I think that we are on self-talk. So I will stop talking.
All right, I'm going to talk about self-talk. And the next time I make popcorn, I'm going to take that opportunity to have really focus on my senses and have a mindfulness moment. So thank you for that, Debbie. So self-talk, of course, is our inner voice. the inner monologue that we have with ourselves. And as we go through our days, many times this self-talk is pretty much unconscious. Sometimes we're aware of it, but a lot of times we're not aware of it. It's just automatic. But there is a very large body of data that supports the benefits of learning to practice positive self-talk. It's, of course, one of the foundations of mindfulness exercises, and it's also one of the foundations of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, of course, one of the most practiced forms of therapy. And I remember in my training when I was in graduate school, my professor was encouraging us to sort of use these practices on ourselves. And she asked us to sort of think about a conversation that we have with ourselves where we're telling ourselves that it's bad. This is bad. This is terrible. This is awful. And she said, what you're doing at that moment is making things worse for yourself. The more you tell yourself that things are bad, the worse they're going to be. So that self-talk is actively making things worse. And that has always stuck with me. And I think it's a great example of just being aware, how being aware of your self-talk can really be helpful in your day-to-day life. All right, so let's talk about how to be mindful about this inner monologue. First of all, think about, as Debbie mentioned earlier, we want to speak to ourselves at least as kindly as you would speak to anyone else. If you catch yourself berating yourself, being down on yourself, that's a good opportunity to change your self-talk and think about talking to yourself just as specially and kindly and kind-heartedly as you would to somebody that you really care about. I know that sometimes when I have conversations about things that I'm doing wrong, I think, I probably would not say this in that way to somebody that I care about. So it's not that you can't, be critical of yourself. And that's the third bullet here. It's about making the self-criticism constructive. And I think that's a good exercise to think about how you would express this to somebody that you really care about. I think that could have been done a little bit better by doing it this way. And maybe next time I'll try that sort of thing. And also, I don't think that very many of us give ourselves nearly the credit that we deserve when we do a good job. I think it's a good practice to step back when we do a good job and pat ourselves on the back and tell ourselves that that was good, and that it's a reminder that we are good and special, have talents, and that is not sort of a normal conversation that most of us have with ourselves, but it's a really good practice to start. And then also, we need to check in with how we're breathing. Debbie talked about that at length. And another concept that we really need to be on the lookout for is cognitive distortions. And I think most of us indulge in these cognitive distortions in a very, casual way, and we're really not aware that we're doing it. So I'm going to give you a few examples. There are a lot of them, but I'm going to give you some examples, and I want you to think about whether you can identify times when you have thought this way, and think about how you could change around those cognitive distortions. So one really common cognitive distortion is polarized thinking. So you think about something in really black and white terms, and you're not seeing the gray area. And an example of this that I think a lot of it happens to a lot of us is, I didn't do that perfectly, so I failed. It's black or white. Unless you did it 1000% perfectly, it's a total failure. And so we need to think about the gray area in there and think, it wasn't exactly perfect, but gosh, I really did a good job at that. So that's a really common one, the polarized thinking. And then we've got overgeneralization, where you have a negative experience and you just apply it to everything. So an example of that would be, well, I had a really negative experience with a relationship, so I'm just bad at relationships. That's just not something I'm good at. So you're overgeneralizing that experience to a broad category of experiences, and we want to watch that tendency. And then relatedly, we have catastrophizing. And I think just about all of us have done this, like assuming the worst thing is going to happen. And, we all know somebody who says, oh, my husband's late for work. He's been in an accident. I just know it. It's like making everything into like the worst thing that it could possibly be, and catastrophizing. And then another cognitive distortion is personalization. And this is where you take things personally, really personally, even though it might not have been intended that way or wasn't meant that way. And it's really not connected to you at all, but you're absorbing that and receiving it like it's all about you. So an example of personalization would be, you've got a lunch date with someone and they cancel it, and you think, well, this is all because I'm not fun to be around and I'm not a good conversationalist, and it's all about me, when it's probably just that, the person you're going to have lunch with had a conflict in their schedule. And then lastly, there are a bunch of these, but I tried to pick out the most common ones to present to you to see if that you could relate to these and maybe change them around when you recognize them in yourself. Is mental filtering, which is focusing only on one aspect of things, like focusing only on the negative things instead of also considering the positives in a situation. And I think that when the focus really for most of us in this model should really be the positive aspects of what's happened. The key to it all is positivity. And again, if you're really aware of your thoughts, that's when you can make the change. Sometimes people actually will set an alarm on their phone or with their Alexa, with their voice assistant, to remind you to check in with your self-talk and think, what have I just been saying to myself? On balance, has this been a positive conversation? Have I been kind to myself? Have I been focusing on the negative things? Have I been maybe making sure to recognize the positive aspects? And sometimes it's also good exercise to not just think about what's the conversation I've just been having with myself, but to actually write some of those things down and write down your statements that you've been making to yourself and really identify them that way. So these are just some simple practices that you can start to adopt to make it more of a habit and a practice. And that's what really this is about, is it's a sort of like strengthening a muscle. And the more you use it, the more that you'll automatically sort of be aware of your self-talk and how to make your self-talk more positive. All right. And finally, there's 3 C's that will help you in this practice. And those 3 C's are, these are tips that cognitive behavioral therapists use. First of all, catch it, catch the thought, the internal dialogue, the self-talk, check it, and think about whether it was positive, negative, and then change it and make it more productive and more helpful and less critical of yourself. And if you want to do some of these practices, YouTube is full of videos that teach you how to do this. But I'm just going to leave you with this final comment from Albert Ellis, that we all think I should have done this, I should have done that, I should do this. You need to stop shoulding on yourself and try to get that word as much as possible out of your vocabulary, and just encourage yourself in saying, instead of saying I should, I really should. So I hope that was helpful to you. All right, so I'll turn it back over to Debbie for this last slide.
We just need to all try to be good to ourselves and to each other.